Imagine standing in the blinding heat of a North African amphitheater in the year 203 AD. The sand beneath your feet is stained red. The synchronized roar of tens of thousands of Roman citizens is absolutely deafening. In the center of this terrifying, blood-soaked chaos sits a 22-year-old nursing mother. She has just been violently tossed into the air by a wild beast. Her bones are heavily bruised. Her coarse tunic is torn. This is the exact, carefully orchestrated moment the mighty Roman Empire expects her to finally break. They expect her to weep, to beg, to crawl in the dust in ultimate defeat. But instead, she does something that completely paralyzes her executioners and echoes through eternity. She quietly asks a guard for a simple hairpin. With steady, reverent hands, she pins up her disheveled hair, absolutely refusing to look like a victim in mourning on the day of her greatest victory. How does a young woman, stripped of her wealth, her family, and her infant child, find such unearthly, terrifying peace in the darkest, most violent moment of her life? What exactly did she see in the pitch-black dungeon the night before that entirely broke the Empire's ultimate weapon of fear? The answer is preserved in a fragile, ink-stained diary she left behind, a sacred document that forever changes how we understand the dread of our own tomorrow. In the suffocating, pitch-black heat of a military dungeon in Carthage, North Africa, the year is 203 AD. The only sound cutting through the stifling silence is the frantic, uneven scratching of a sharpened reed pen against coarse parchment. A 22-year-old noblewoman named Vibia Perpetua sits on the damp, filth-covered stone floor. Her expensive patrician garments have been violently stripped away, replaced by the humiliating, scratchy tunic of a condemned criminal. Her body aches with a specific, agonizing pain. She is a nursing mother. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Perpetua is writing a diary of her final days. According to the ancient records passed down to us, what she is meticulously recording by the dim, flickering light of a single oil lamp is not a political manifesto. It is a desperate, deeply intimate chronicle of human terror colliding with divine providence. She is documenting the universal, paralyzing fear of the unknown. For Perpetua, the terrifying concept of tomorrow is not a metaphor or a vague anxiety about the future. It is a literal, impending date on the Roman civic calendar, the birthday of the emperor's son. A day that will be celebrated with grand spectacles and spilled blood in the local amphitheater. To fully grasp the weight of her situation, we must understand that to the Roman mind, time, destiny, and the future belonged entirely to the empire. The state controlled your status, your safety, and your survival. If you defied the systemic order of the gods and the emperor, Rome did not simply execute you, it sought to completely erase you. The empire weaponized the fear of the future to maintain its vast borders. The dungeon she inhabits, which Perpetua describes in her own surviving diary as a dark hole, was explicitly designed to break the human spirit long before the physical body was ever brought to the arena. The stifling, unbreathable heat, the aggressive jostling of common criminals in the dark, the extortion practiced by the prison guards just to allow the prisoners a breath of fresh air. These were the calculated micro-humiliations meant to strip away every single layer of her dignity, her identity, and her sanity. The Roman authorities, and even her own esteemed family, hold a very specific, stubborn, false belief about her condition. They are utterly convinced that this is merely a passing phase of youthful stubbornness. They believe that the horrifying darkness of the cell, combined with the visceral, biological ache for her nursing infant, will quickly shatter her religious resolve. How could it not? She is a pampered noble woman, accustomed to the bright sunlight, the cool breezes of the Mediterranean Sea, and the absolute safety of her wealthy father's sprawling estate. In their pragmatic minds, she is acting as an unnatural mother, brainwashed by a dangerous, illicit cult from the eastern provinces, willingly throwing her vibrant life into an abyssal void. But as she writes in the dark, pressing the reed pen into the parchment, a vastly different reality begins to emerge. Her sacred wound, the crushing, suffocating dread of stepping into an unlit, violent future utterly alone, is the exact same wound that the human heart has carried since the dawn of time. It is the paralyzing anxiety of the unknown. When we look at a terrifying medical diagnosis, a sudden financial collapse, or the devastating loss of a loved one. We feel the exact same primal terror. What is going to happen to me tomorrow? Who will protect me in the dark? Perpetua is sitting in the absolute dark, fully expecting to die in agony. Yet, despite the horrific conditions surrounding her, the ink drying on her parchment does not reflect the frantic hysteria of a broken mind. It reflects an emerging, mysterious, and profound clarity. She is beginning to sense a hidden truth that the pragmatic Roman Empire cannot possibly comprehend. She is beginning to realize that the dark, terrifying space of tomorrow is not an empty void waiting to consume her. Someone else has already walked into it, and he is waiting for her there. The heavy, iron-reinforced wooden doors of the Carthage prison groan open, letting in a blinding, agonizing sliver of intense North African sunlight. But it is not the armed guards coming to drag her to the torture chambers, as she might have feared. It is someone whose mere presence will inflict a far deeper, more intimate spiritual wound than any Roman whip. Standing in the doorway, trembling, exhausted, and stooped with unimaginable grief, is Perpetua's elderly father. According to historical tradition, her father was a devout pagan and a highly respected patriarch of the city. In Roman society, the father held patria potesta's absolute legal and moral authority over his family. But he does not come into this squalid cell with anger or authoritarian demands. He comes with a devastating, pathetic desperation that shatters the social order. The sight of his beloved daughter bruised, filthy, smelling of the dungeon, and chained to the cold wall alongside slaves and common thieves breaks him completely. He collapses onto the damp stone floor. His distinguished white hair brushes against her chained, blistered feet as he weeps uncontrollably. He is not just begging her to change her mind. He is performing an act of ultimate submission that completely upends the patriarchal structure of his world. He kisses her hands. He weeps bitterly, and in a gesture of profound, heart-wrenching alienation, he refuses to call her daughter. Instead, looking up at her from the dirt, he calls her Lady. This is the first true, agonizing layer of exclusion. The Roman Empire has already stripped her of her civic rights and her physical freedom, but her father's uncontrollable grief strips her of her deeply rooted belonging. He accuses her of destroying the family name, of turning her back on the ancestors who built their wealth, and worst of all, of condemning her own infant son to the miserable life of a motherless outcast. Have pity on my gray head, he begs her, his voice cracking in the damp air. Have pity on your infant son, who cannot live without you. Do not destroy us all. None of us will ever be able to speak freely again if anything happens to you. For Perpetua, this is a sacred injustice of the highest, most painful order. She is doing the only thing her awakened conscience allows her to do, remaining faithful to Christ, yet doing the right thing is causing unimaginable, visible agony to the person she loves most in the world. It is an excruciating collision between earthly, filial piety and absolute, transcendent obedience to God. The Roman guards stand by in the shadows, silently watching this intimate humiliation unfold, fully expecting the intense psychological pressure of a weeping father to snap her resolve. Why wouldn't it? The state is demanding such a tiny, seemingly insignificant compromise. Just a pinch of incense dropped on the altar fires for the genius of the emperor. A momentary gesture of state loyalty that everyone performs. In the eyes of the world, her refusal looks like absolute madness, extreme selfishness, and an unnatural rejection of her own flesh and blood. Perpetua looks down at her weeping father, her heart breaking within her chest. The historical record preserves a moment of stunning, heartbreaking clarity amidst the emotional chaos. She points a trembling finger toward a simple clay water pitcher sitting in the dirt of the cell. "Father," she asks gently, "do you see this vessel lying here to be a pitcher, or whatever it may be?" He nods through his tears, confused by the question. "Can it be called by any other name than what it is?" she asks. "No," he replies. "Neither can I call myself anything else than what I am, a Christian." It is a gentle, almost conversational reply, devoid of malice, but it carries the immense weight of a monumental spiritual shift. Her core identity is no longer tied to her patrician status, her Roman citizenship, or even her cherished role as a daughter in her father's house. But this divine revelation does not lessen the human pain. When her father finally leaves the cell, realizing with creeping horror that he cannot move her, he leaves in a state of utter despair, taking her baby with him. Perpetua is left alone in the suffocating silence of the dungeon, her sacred wound deepening into a profound, chilling loneliness. She is entirely misunderstood by the world, practically excluded by her own blood, and facing a looming future that seems to hold nothing but extreme violence. Days pass in the dark, blurring into a continuous, exhausting nightmare of heat, thirst, and mounting anxiety. Then, the inevitable command finally arrives. Perpetua and her fellow believers are violently dragged from the darkness of the dungeon and thrust into the blinding, chaotic, sun-drenched light of the Roman Forum. It is the day of the public tribunal. Governor Hilarianus, a pragmatic, powerful, and likely exhausted representative of the empire, sits elevated on the official judgment seat, flanked by armed lictors. The forum is packed with a restless, sweating, and increasingly hostile crowd of Carthaginian citizens. This is not a trial to determine guilt or innocence in the modern sense. Her guilt is already assumed by her presence there. This is a public spectacle of submission, a ritual designed to reinforce the power of the state. Hilarianus looks down from his elevated platform at the young, disheveled mother. He is not a cartoonish villain relishing in evil. He is a career bureaucrat trying to maintain civic order in a volatile province. He offers her a way out, echoing the exact same agonizing emotional pressure her father had applied in the cell. "Spare the gray hairs of your father," Hilarianus commands, his voice echoing across the marble stones. "Spare the infancy of your boy. Offer sacrifice for the well-being of the emperors, and you may go home." Suddenly, there is a violent commotion in the crowd. Her father, having heard of the tribunal, bursts through the ranks of the armored soldiers, clutching Perpetua's infant son tightly in his arms. He pushes his way to the very steps of the tribunal platform, holding the crying child out toward her, screaming over the deafening noise of the crowd. "Perform the sacrifice. Have pity on your baby." The tension in the forum becomes unbearable. The air is thick with anticipation. Perpetua is standing at the absolute precipice of human endurance. Her body biologically longs for her child. Her breasts ache with milk. Her heart shatters into pieces for her father's public humiliation. The entire Roman system is pressing down on her shoulders. But she looks up at the governor, her voice remarkably steady, and says two words that seal her fate. "I will not." "Are you a Christian?" Hilarianus demands, offering her one final, fleeting chance to deny it. "I am a Christian," she replies clearly. At that moment, the governor's pragmatic patience snaps. He gives a swift, sharp hand gesture. A Roman soldier steps forward, raises his heavy wooden rod, and strikes Perpetua's elderly father brutally across the face, knocking the old man and the baby to the marble floor. The sight of her father being physically beaten in public, directly on her account, is a micro-humiliation that cuts infinitely deeper than any physical torture the Romans could inflict on her own body. Later, Christian memory preserves her own devastating words regarding this exact moment. "I felt for my father's case as if I had been beaten myself. I grieved for his miserable old age." The sentence is immediately, coldly pronounced. She and her companions are officially condemned ad bestias to the wild beasts. They are to serve as the halftime entertainment for the upcoming imperial birthday games. As she is forcefully dragged back into the shadows of the prison, the sacred wound reaches its absolute, crushing nadir. The sentence is final. The empire has spoken, and its word is law. There will be no daring rescue, no sudden political pardon. But the deepest, most excruciating agony is yet to come. In a quiet, devastating administrative move, Perpetua sends a desperate message from the prison to her family, begging for her baby back, just so she can nurse him one last time before she dies. Her father, broken and bitter, flatly refuses. The child will remain with him. The maternal tie is completely, permanently severed. This is the intimate spiritual wound in its most agonizing form. The terrifying fear that her religious sacrifice is violently destroying the very people she was meant to love and protect. Left alone in the pitch black, her body aching, her milk painfully drying up over the next few days, she must confront the sheer, terrifying reality of tomorrow. The Roman Empire relies entirely on this exact moment of psychological despair. They rely on the victim feeling utterly abandoned by the heavens. We must be careful to understand that these early martyrs did not masochistically seek out death. They loved life, they loved their families, and the approach of a violent end was viscerally terrifying. Left in the dark, Perpetua is haunted by the heavy silence. Has God's purpose been completely misunderstood? Is the dark, blood-soaked arena waiting for her tomorrow truly just an empty, godless void of meaningless pain? It is the final night before the games, the last few hours of waiting. The psychological warfare of the Roman penal system is specifically designed to culminate in this specific, agonizing night, hoping beyond hope that the condemned victims will finally break under the mental strain, beg the guards for mercy, and publicly renounce their faith before the dawn breaks. Perpetua sits in the sweltering cell. Her parchment is nearly full. The diary she is writing, a fragile, ink-stained relic that will miraculously survive the eventual fall of Rome itself, records the exact moment her profound terror permanently shifts into something entirely different. Utterly exhausted, having wept all her tears for her father, and having painfully relinquished all earthly rights to her child, Perpetua falls into a deep, death-like sleep on the stone floor. It is here, in the complete vulnerability of unconsciousness, that the historical record preserves a vision so vivid, startling, and theologically profound that it would alter the course of early Christian memory forever. In her dream, the suffocating damp walls of the Carthage dungeon completely vanish. She finds herself standing at the base of an impossibly high, narrow golden ladder that stretches endlessly upward into the radiant heavens. But this is not a ladder of comfort or easy escape. Attached to both sides of the golden rungs are the horrific instruments of human cruelty: sharp swords, iron lances, flesh-tearing hooks, and daggers. It is a stunning visual representation of the terrifying tomorrow she must face, a required climb through severe pain, sudden violence, and tearing flesh. To make a single misstep on this ladder is to be shredded by the unforgiving iron of the Empire. And at the very base of the ladder, completely blocking the ascent, lies a massive, terrifying dragon. The beast represents the primal, ancient fear of death itself, the ultimate, paralyzing weapon of the Roman state. It is the embodiment of the anxiety of the unknown. Perpetua stands before the dragon, hesitating. Above her, her spiritual mentor, a man named Saturus, who had already begun to successfully climb the ladder, turns and looks down at her from higher up. "Perpetua," he calls out, his voice echoing in the light, "I am waiting for you, but be careful that the dragon does not bite you." In the dream, the paralyzing panic she had felt for weeks evaporates. The intimate wound of abandonment has been deeply cauterized by grace. She looks directly at the terrifying beast, the literal embodiment of everything she has dreaded about the upcoming arena, and she speaks with a newfound spiritual authority she did not possess before her arrest. "In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ," she says boldly, "he shall not hurt me." At the mere sound of that sacred name, the dragon does not rear up to attack. Instead, it slowly, almost submissively, lifts its massive, scaly head. The beast that was meant to violently devour her is suddenly pacified by an unseen, overwhelming power. And then, Perpetua does something that defines the absolute midpoint of no return in her soul. She lifts her bare foot, steps directly onto the head of the dragon, and uses the beast itself as the very first stepping stone to begin her ascent up the ladder. She climbs. She passes the deadly iron hooks and the sharp swords, completely unharmed in her spirit, until she reaches a vast, incredibly beautiful garden at the top. There, a white-haired shepherd is quietly milking sheep. He looks up at her, smiles with profound warmth, and says, "Welcome, my child." He gives her a small morsel of sweet cheese. She eats it, and the thousands of people standing around in shining white robes say in unison, "Amen." Perpetua wakes up in the dark dungeon. The taste of the sweet milk is inexplicably still lingering in her mouth. The panic is entirely gone. The diary records her final, chillingly calm realization. "And I awoke, and we understood that it was to be a passion, and we ceased henceforth to have any hope in this world." This is not a dark statement of suicidal despair. It is a statement of absolute, transcendent liberation. She has officially crossed the threshold. The Roman Empire has completely, irreversibly lost its leverage over her. The document, her fragile, priceless diary, ends right here. She hands the rolled scroll to another believer through the bars, leaving the final chapter of her life to be written not with ink, but with her own blood on the arena sand. The intense anticipation in the cell is no longer about whether she will somehow survive the day. It is about how the mighty empire will react when it finally realizes its ultimate weapon of fear has been entirely neutralized. Tomorrow is coming, but she now knows exactly who is waiting for her there. The morning of March 7, 203 AD, breaks hot and bright over the sprawling city of Carthage. The heavy, iron-studded wooden gates of the massive amphitheater groan open, revealing a blinding expanse of sun-baked sand and the absolutely deafening, bloodthirsty roar of tens of thousands of Roman citizens. This amphitheater is the ultimate machinery of state terror. The arena is designed not just for physical execution, but for total public humiliation. It is a carefully stage-managed theater, meant to visually enforce the absolute supremacy of the emperor over the bodies, minds, and souls of his subjugated people. Perpetua and her small band of companions are violently marched from the damp darkness of the holding cells into the glaring, unforgiving light. As they approach the sand, the Roman guards attempt to force one final, deeply humiliating degradation upon them. They order the Christian men to put on the scarlet pagan robes of the priests of Saturn, and they aggressively order Perpetua and the other women to wear the revealing notices of Ceres. Even in the moment of death, the empire demands that they participate in the state mythology, attempting to erase their Christian identity entirely and dress them up as defeated, compliant actors in a Roman religious play. But the point of no return has already been decisively crossed. Perpetua stops walking. She flatly refuses the garments. She looks directly into the eyes of the Roman tribune, the powerful commander of the guards, and speaks with a clear, unshaken, and commanding voice that cuts through the noise. We have come thus far of our own free will, that our liberty should not be abused. We have yielded our lives to avoid doing such a thing as this. This was our pact with you. The tribune, completely confronted by a moral authority he cannot understand or forcefully break, stammers, hesitates, and shockingly yields. The public confrontation is stunning in its implications. The massive crowd, fully expecting to see weeping, terrified, compliant victims dragging their feet in the sand, is instead confronted with men and women marching with radiant, unearthly joy. Some historical sources suggest that Perpetua walked out into the massive arena with a piercing, unwavering gaze, staring down the screaming crowd until the spectators themselves felt uncomfortable and had to look away. This is the very moment the hidden truth of the story is fully, undeniably revealed. The Roman Empire arrogantly believed that by controlling the physical arena, they controlled reality itself. They believed that tomorrow was a dark, empty void where they, with their swords and beasts, held all the power. But the hidden truth is that the divine is not confined by Roman time, Roman geography, or Roman law. Prevenient grace, the profound theological truth of the God who goes before us, means that the creator of the universe had already entered the Carthage amphitheater long before the iron gates were ever opened. He had already sanctified the bloody sand. The terrifying space of tomorrow was already fully occupied by the presence of Christ. The crowd, sensing this loss of control, grows furious. The silence and cowardice of the Roman civic system, which relies entirely on institutionalized terror to keep the masses in line, is suddenly exposed as incredibly fragile. The spectators cannot tolerate victims who simply do not fear them. They scream in rage for the martyrs to be brutally scourged as they pass the line of gladiators. Perpetua and her friends gladly endure the stinging whips, rejoicing that they are allowed to share in the physical sufferings of their Lord. Then, the specific tailored horror prepared for the women is unleashed. The Romans release a mad heifer, a wild cow chosen specifically to mock their gender and their recent maternal status. The beast, enraged and terrified by the noise, charges blindly across the sand. It strikes Perpetua with devastating, bone-jarring force, tossing her violently high into the hot air. She hits the hard, packed ground with a sickening thud, the breath knocked entirely from her lungs, her coarse tunic tearing down the side to expose her bruised flesh. The crowd gasps collectively. leaning forward over the stone barriers, waiting eagerly for the screams. They wait for the panic, the begging, the desperate crawling in the dirt that will validate their cultural superiority. They wait for the young, broken mother to finally snap under the sheer physical reality of the injustice. But what they witness next completely shatters the entire paradigm of Roman power, leaving a spiritual legacy that would eventually, centuries later, bring the mighty Roman Empire to its knees. Perpetua does not scream. She does not cower in the dust. Slowly, deliberately, ignoring the agony radiating through her bruised bones, the young woman sits up on the blood-stained sand of the arena. Her body is battered, and the physical pain is undeniable, but her spirit remains entirely untouched by the violent chaos swirling around her. The very first thing she does is look down at her torn tunic. With quiet, deliberate dignity, she pulls the ripped fabric over her exposed legs, choosing, even in the face of a charging wild beast, to protect her modesty over tending to her pain. By doing this, she forcefully restores her own dignity, in the exact moment the Empire tried to strip it away. Then, she looks around the blinding arena, seemingly in a state of deep, ecstatic spiritual trance. The historical record is debated regarding the exact physiological state she was in. Some scholars suggest shock, others divine ecstasy, but those who witnessed it recorded that she seemed entirely unaware of the trauma she had just endured. She turns to her bewildered companions and asks, "When are we going to be thrown to that heifer?" When they tell her it has already happened, she refuses to believe it until they point to the fresh, bleeding bruises on her own body. Her sacred wound, the paralyzing fear of tomorrow, the agony of abandonment has been completely, miraculously healed. The Empire's deliberate attempt to erase her memory, humiliate her body, and silence her voice has failed spectacularly. Instead of expecting cheap revenge, where lightning strikes from heaven to dramatically destroy the Colosseum, we witness a much more profound moral reversal. The divine justice is specific and morally symmetrical. Rome is defeated not by superior violence, but by the absolute public invalidation of its fear. The spiritual blindness of the institutional machine cost it the only thing it truly cared about: control over the human soul. As the bloody games finally draw to a close, the battered survivors are brought to the center of the arena to be dispatched by the sword. Perpetua stands tall. She asks one of the guards for a simple hairpin. With deliberate, reverent movements, she pins up her disheveled, dust-covered hair. In Roman culture, unbound, messy hair was the universal, recognized symbol of a woman in deep mourning or defeat. But Perpetua absolutely refuses to mourn. As she later explained to those near her, it is not right that a martyr should die with her hair in disorder, lest she should seem to be mourning in her hour of glory. A young, trembling gladiator approaches her. He is a novice, completely terrified of the serene woman standing before him. His hands shake so violently that when he strikes with the heavy sword, he misses the lethal mark on her neck, striking her collarbone instead. Perpetua cries out briefly in sudden pain, but then she does the unthinkable. She reaches out her own hand, firmly grasps the trembling blade of her execution. This is the final, unforgettable symbolic image. A young mother, completely stripped of all worldly power, physically holding the sword of the mighty Roman Empire, guiding it with steady hands because she is no longer a victim. She is willingly laying down her life, returning her spirit to the God who had already gone before her into the dark. The restoration is complete. Her dignity, her voice, and her historical honor are eternally secured. Her personal diary will be meticulously copied and read across the known world, inspiring countless generations of believers. The sacred message she leaves behind echoes through the centuries, speaking directly into our own modern anxieties. Whatever tomorrow you are currently dreading, whatever dark arena, terrifying medical room, or lonely, uncertain path lies ahead of you, the divine truth remains completely unchanged. The future is not an empty, godless void where pain has the final word. The God of the universe transcends time itself. He has already stepped into your tomorrow. He has already crossed the threshold, occupied the terrifying space, and broken the teeth of the dragon. You do not have to fear the dark, because when you finally arrive there, you will find that he has already gone ahead of you. The surviving diary of Vibia Perpetua is not simply a fragile historical artifact of ancient persecution. It is a profound, timeless mirror reflecting our own deepest, most intimate anxieties. Her story forces us to quietly confront a deeply uncomfortable question. What do we do when doing the right holy thing causes unimaginable pain to the people we love the most? Perpetua's agonizing separation from her weeping father and her infant son challenges the modern human instinct to preserve our worldly comforts and familial peace at absolutely all costs. Yet, her immense sacrifice reveals a breathtaking spiritual courage. She recognized that a love rooted in the compromise of divine truth is ultimately fragile, and she entrusted her family to the God she was dying for. Furthermore, Perpetua profoundly redefines the very concept of the future. The ancient Roman Empire, much like our own modern anxieties, heavily weaponized tomorrow. We often lie awake at night dreading a medical diagnosis, a financial collapse, or a season of profound loneliness, viewing the future as an empty, hostile, godless void waiting to brutally consume us. But Perpetua's vivid vision of the golden ladder and the pacified dragon offers a radical, life-altering perspective, the reality of prevenient grace. The divine does not merely walk beside us in the comfortable light. He intentionally goes before us into the terrifying dark. The intimidating, shadowed spaces we dread are already fully occupied by God. When we finally step into the daunting arenas of our own lives, we are not stepping into abandoned, chaotic territory. We are stepping onto sanctified ground by calmly reclaiming her dignity, symbolized by a simple, everyday hairpin. Perpetua proves that the empire of fear only holds power over our minds if we actively grant it permission. True spiritual victory does not require the violent destruction of our enemies. It requires the absolute, unshakable realization that our tomorrow is already beautifully secure. Thank you for walking through this profound and sacred history with us today. If Perpetua's incredible courage and unearthly peace resonated with your spirit, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might be facing a dark or difficult season, and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the forgotten, sacred corners of faith and history. We would love to hear from you in the comments below. When you look at the daunting arenas in your own life, the uncertain tomorrows, the heavy anxieties, or the fear of the unknown, how does knowing that God has already gone ahead of you change your perspective? Have you ever experienced a moment of unexplainable, profound peace in the midst of personal chaos? Please share your story with our community, and make sure you have your notifications turned on. Next time, we will uncover the haunting, miraculous story of a forgotten, ancient scroll buried deep in the desert sands, a fragile text that survived centuries of absolute silence to beautifully vindicate a misunderstood prophet. You won't want to miss it.